Born into a rising European royal family, Princess Stéphanie seemed destined for great things. But instead, she married into a royal nightmare. Trapped in a loveless marriage, she lived a life of betrayal and illness, which left her infertile at the age of 22. Just 2 years later, a shocking incident changed her life. Join Project 360 official to discover her tragic yet fascinating story. Princess Stéphanie Clotilde was born on May 21, 1864, at Mayerling Palace, on the outskirts of Brussels, Belgium. Her father was Prince Leopold, heir to the Belgian throne and son of King Leopold I, the first king of Belgium since its independence in 1831. Just a year and a half after her birth, her grandfather died and her father became King Leopold II. To the world, he is revered as a powerful statesman who made Belgium important on the international stage despite its small size. He built the country with magnificent palaces and imposing civic buildings, cementing his reputation as a visionary ruler. But behind the glamour of his reign, darkness lurked. Today, Leopold II's legacy is one of horror. He turned the Congo into a fiefdom, ruled it with an iron fist, and exploited its people for profit. During his reign, millions of Congolese were enslaved on rubber plantations, subjected to numerous atrocities. Sadly, these conditions, combined with disease and famine, led to a drastic decline in the Congolese population. As a result, part of Stéphanie's family fortune was made from Congolese blood money. Stéphanie's mother was Marie Henriette of Austria, a member of the Austrian House of Habsburg, which ruled Belgium for much of the 18th century. She and Leopold had 4 children. Their eldest daughter, Louise, was born in 1858, followed by their only son, Leopold, in 1859. Stéphanie was born almost 5 years later, and 8 years after that, they had their youngest daughter, Clementine. Despite their many children, the Belgian royal family was not a happy one. Her parents' marriage was a political arrangement, and they had very different tastes and personalities. As time went on, tensions grew, and Queen Marie Henriette became increasingly estranged from her husband, spending much of the 1870s living apart from him. This added to the rigid constraints of royal life. And in the years to come, Stéphanie was drawn into a world much darker than she had ever imagined. Stéphanie's early years were marked by tragedy. In January 1869, her world was turned upside down when her brother, the heir to the throne, died, plunging the royal family into mourning. Although only 4.5 years old, the tragedy left a deep wound in Stéphanie and began the decline of her parents' marriage. Then, in 1871, disaster struck again. Europe was still battling deadly waves of disease: typhus, smallpox, and the dreaded Green Death, the nickname for cholera. And soon after, an outbreak swept through Brussels. Stéphanie, not yet 7, fell gravely ill with typhus. For weeks, she hovered between life and death, unconscious, feverish, and in pain. Her family feared the worst, but against all odds, she survived. 3 years later, Stéphanie's rigorous education began. She was educated in many subjects and fluent in several languages, although she was not pampered, and she and her sisters were raised by strict disciplinarians. From 1875 onwards, Stéphanie was often the most senior royal at court. Her older sister Louise had married and left Brussels, while her mother was often absent from the capital. Then, in the winter of 1878, her fate was sealed. As a teenager, she was introduced to Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria, the only son of Emperor Franz Joseph and heir to the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire. Rudolf was 20 years old while Stéphanie was only 14. But their meeting was no coincidence. It was an arranged marriage. Behind the scenes, negotiations were in full swing. The Austrians saw Stephanie as a suitable bride who could ensure the succession by producing male heirs. The pressure was great, and after lengthy discussions, the marriage was arranged. On May 10, 1881, just days before her 17th birthday, Stephanie and Rudolf were married in a lavish ceremony in Vienna. But beneath the royal pomp, dark clouds began to form over their marriage. Married life was far from a fairy tale for Stephanie. There was no great love, no deep affection, only duty. At first, their relationship was amiable, even somewhat happy, but cracks soon appeared. Rudolf had a volatile personality, and Stephanie found herself trapped in the palace, constantly watched and with little freedom. Despite the strain, the marriage produced a daughter, Elizabeth Marie, born in September 1883. But instead of joy, Rudolf greeted the news with thinly veiled disappointment. Although he wanted a male heir to the empire, the little girl would be their only child, and Stephanie's only child. By the mid-1880s, she was infertile. Her husband was to blame. Rudolf was not only an alcoholic, but also a voracious womanizer, having affairs with women all over Vienna. He suffered from several sexually transmitted diseases, and most historians agree that he likely gave Stephanie both syphilis and gonorrhea, which left her unable to have children at the age of 22. At first, doctors blamed peritonitis. Rudolf kept his illness a secret, and by the time Stephanie learned the truth, it was too late. Betrayed and humiliated, she was consumed with resentment. She refused to sleep in the same bed as her husband, who often came home at dawn reeking of alcohol and other women. Meanwhile, Rudolf, consumed by his own grief, was increasingly debauched. By the late 1880s, it was common knowledge at court that Stephanie would never have any more children. Rudolf's affairs continued as if nothing had changed, and the worst was yet to come. Among Rudolf's many mistresses, one stood out, Countess Marie Vetsera. In 1888, at the age of 17, she became involved with the 30-year-old Crown Prince. During this time, Rudolf's behavior became increasingly erratic, possibly due to his worsening syphilis. He and Vetsera began spending much of their time at Mayerling, a remote hunting lodge near Vienna that Rudolf had purchased and turned into a private retreat from the royal court. On January 30th, 1889, Stephanie received shocking news. That morning, her husband, Crown Prince Rudolf, and Mary Vetsera were found dead in Mayerling. The Mayerling incident, as it became known, led to an investigation and rumors of intrigue, assassination, and even political intrigue that circulated for years. But in the end, the truth was grim. Rudolf had shot his mistress and then taken his own life. So, at the age of 24, Stephanie was widowed and unable to have any more children. Strangely, in the letter he left her, Rudolf expressed some affection, although there is no doubt that his impact on her life was terrible in many ways. After Rudolf's death, Stephanie hoped to return home to Belgium. But there was a problem. Her daughter, Elizabeth Marie, was still a Habsburg princess, and the royal court refused to let her leave Vienna. Stephanie, now a dowager princess, was stranded in a city where she was not welcome. Her husband's family turned their backs on her and saw her presence as a painful reminder of what had happened to Rudolf. During this time of loneliness, she found solace in a romance with Count Arthur Podolski, a Polish nobleman who stood by her through her darkest days. But fate struck again. Podolski, not yet 40, was stricken with laryngeal cancer. A botched operation left him unable to speak, and by March 1890, he was dead. Stephanie, still grieving over Rudolf's violent death, was once again plunged into mourning. To escape her sadness, She traveled extensively, wandering the Mediterranean, Malta, Tunisia, Sicily, Corfu, and beyond, looking for distraction, escape, or perhaps a new beginning. Still young and able to remarry, King Leopold II had grand plans. He wanted Stephanie to marry the new heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But that marriage never happened. Instead, in the late 1890s, Stephanie fell in love with Count Elemer Lonye, a Hungarian nobleman. This was not a political alliance. It was a marriage of love. And Elemer even converted to Roman Catholicism, hoping to win King Leopold's approval. But it was not to be. In a scathing letter, her father flatly refused to allow the marriage. He would not allow his daughter to marry below her rank. Despite this, Stephanie defied her father, and on 22nd March 1900, she married Elemer at Miramar Castle near Trieste, losing her royal titles in the process. Throughout these years, family disputes continued to arise. Back in Belgium, Stephanie's father was aging, and with no direct male heir alive, plans were made for his grandson, Prince Albert, to succeed him as King Albert of Amers. Leopold had long been angry with his daughters for marrying below their social status and had virtually disowned them. His resentment ran so deep that he forbade Stephanie from attending her mother's funeral in 1902 and refused to see her before his death. After Leopold's death in 1909, his daughters hoped to inherit a portion of his vast fortune. Instead, they discovered something quite shocking. He had left the bulk of his estate to Caroline Lacroix, his much younger mistress, whom he had secretly married just 5 days before his death. Furious, Stephanie and her sisters launched a bitter legal battle that lasted 5 years. Stephanie eventually won a settlement of 5 million francs. In the summer of 1914, while on a state visit to Sarajevo, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, whom Stephanie's father had hoped she would marry, was assassinated by Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip. His death sparked a crisis that quickly escalated into World War I. Just weeks later, Germany invaded Belgium despite its neutrality, and Stephanie's homeland remained under German occupation for the next 4 years. Because Austria-Hungary had allied with Germany during the war, Stephanie found herself in the uncomfortable position of living in an empire that was helping to occupy her homeland. Furthermore, she believed that Emperor Franz Joseph was somehow involved in the assassination of his heir, Franz Ferdinand. Fortunately, she and Elemer were far from Vienna at the time. In 1906, they settled in Villa Rudolfsheim, in what is now Slovakia, one of the few places not ravaged by the war. There, Stephanie devoted herself to charity work, finding purpose in a world that was falling apart around her. When Emperor Franz Joseph died in 1916, Stephanie and Elemer returned to Vienna for his funeral and the coronation of the new king just 2 months later. Elemer was made a prince in the Hungarian nobility. But their world soon collapsed. In October 1918, Austria-Hungary lost the war and disintegrated into separate nations. While most of the Habsburg royal family was exiled, Stephanie and Elemer were spared. They remained at the Rudolfsheim villa, although they continued to travel frequently and had a happy marriage. Stephanie and Elemer lived a quiet life after World War I. At that time, she was also a housewife, as her daughter had given birth to several children in the early 1900s. However, the relationship between Stephanie and her daughter became strained in the early 1920s. This was due to Elizabeth Marie's personal and political life. She was a socialist and was known in Austria as the Red Duchess. After a final quarrel in 1924, Stephanie and her daughter, Elizabeth Marie, apparently broke off all contact, never speaking again. During these years, Stephanie compiled her memoirs, which were published in 1935 and in English in 1937 under the title, I Was Empress. However, this was not a full autobiography, as she barely mentioned the half-century after Rudolf's death. Instead, the book is divided into 4 parts, with the final part titled, The Tragedy of Mayerling. It is clear that her story, at least the one she chose to tell, ended in 1889. Perhaps her publishers knew that this was the version readers wanted, or perhaps she simply did not want to share details of her private life since that fateful day. In September 1939, World War II broke out. Stephanie and her husband did not live near the front lines, and neighboring countries were spared the worst of the fighting. However, near the end of the war, the couple became concerned about Nazi plans to convert Rudolfsheim into a field hospital. As the Red Army advanced into Central Europe in the late spring of 1945, Stephanie and Eleanor took refuge in the Pannonhalma Arch Monastery. She died there on August 23, 1945, at the age of 81. She had disowned her daughter a year earlier, and Elizabeth Marie did not attend Stephanie's funeral. She was buried in the crypt of the Arch Abbey, and Eleanor, who died less than a year later, was buried next to her. If you found this video helpful, like it, share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to Project 360 Official to get notified of new videos as soon as they are uploaded.